Hello, and welcome to Two Pews in a Pod. Join us as we explore faith in a modern world at Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Now, here is your host, Pastor Paul Baglios.
I'm Paul Baglios, happy to welcome you to the third of our three planned episodes in this podcast series titled Luminaries of Our Christian Past. I am joined once again by our deacon Megan Wyatt, by my spouse, Pastor Sharon Baglios. We spoke in the first episode about Henry Melchior Muhlenberg, and then second episode, Megan spoke with us about Sojourner Truth, and today Sharon's going to talk to us about Dorothy Day. She's been saying she's very nervous, so we're going to help her out. We're going to help her out with good prompts and encouragements, so we could start off simply. Tell us a little bit something of who she was, where she was, what she did.
Sure. So Dorothy Day was born in 1897. Right before the turn of the century. And that
would be 1 century precisely after Sojourner Truth.
Actually, yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She is known, and we talk about her because of her involvement with founding the Catholic worker movement. Mm-hmm. She did that work in New York City, and she spoke out and demonstrated, marched, and protested against economic exploitation, against the wars that were fought during the 20th century, against racial injustice, against gender and religious discrimination. And she advocated always for a nonviolent approach to whatever was going on. Mm-hmm. The Catholic worker movement came about in two ways. First was the publication of the Catholic worker newspaper. The first edition was distributed in Union Square in New York City on May 1st, 1933. So think about what was going on in our country in 1933. The paper, they had printed 2,500 copies, and they distributed it during a time when people were gathering in Union Square on May 1st, because that was a day to talk and think about labor. They sold the paper for a penny a copy. The paper still is published 7 times a year, and the cost is a penny a copy.
I love that.
So that was the first thing that was a part of the Catholic worker movement. The second thing, which probably most people are more familiar with, is the establishment of Catholic worker houses of hospitality.
Right.
And this came about through the partnership of Dorothy Day and a man named Peter Marin, who came from France and has a very, a history, a biography with lots of gaps. There are a lot of things that are not known about Peter, but
someone knows.
I'm going to tell a story about how they met in a moment, but just want to say that the Catholic worker houses began soon after the publication of the newspaper, and were followed by the establishment of some farming communes. The purpose was to be, the word house, to be a home, to be a welcoming place, and hospitality, no questions asked, come and stay as long as you need to. Currently, there are 187 Catholic worker houses in the United States.
Still.
I had no idea.
Yep.
Wow.
And about 30 internationally.
Have you been to any?
Oh, I have. There is a Catholic worker house in Washington, D.C., in the northwest part of D.C., close to the National Zoo. And that particular house is for women and children. And you asked if I had been to one. When we lived in Dubuque, there was a Catholic worker house in Dubuque, Iowa, which houses men who are otherwise unhoused. And 2 nights a week, there is a community meal. Anyone is welcome to drop in and partake of the food that is offered. And there is also a time for conversation. And the conversation centers around, what is the meaning of work? Why does work lead to some people having great wealth and some people being exploited? And what is the role of the church and what is the role of society to make changes in what we observe?
So I have a whole bunch of questions.
Let me finish.
Oh.
The other
we could be recording this at home.
the other thing that the other place I visited in Dubuque was a farming commune. There was a group of folks, probably 10 total, who had a farm, and that's where I learned about chicken tractors. They were raising chickens. A chicken tractor is a pen on wheels, and the chickens are moved each day from a different part of the pasture.
To fertilize it.
To fertilize it and to
keep them from destroying.
To eat all the bugs. So that was happening in Dubuque as well. So go ahead.
So I'm curious to know, because I'm not recalling, but 1933, of course, we're in the Great Depression.
Right.
The world is in the Great Depression. Right. Worker movements and labor movements were often associated with communism.
Absolutely.
Was that true of the Catholic worker movement?
So the reason it's called the Catholic Worker is because there was a publication called the Communist Worker.
Oh, okay. This is good.
And
do tell.
So I'm going to circle back to say that when you asked me if I would be part of this, and I resisted, I considered it because I thought I would talk about St. Francis. And almost immediately realized that was too easy. I mean, certainly St. Francis is a luminary.
Yes.
And everyone knows who St. Francis is, but I think we have domesticated Francis.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I looked to make sure that in the ELC gardens, there is a St. Francis. And yes, indeed, he has a bird perched on his arm because he would never scare anyone off or be unacceptable to anyone in our mind's eye. And we sing the words to the hymns that he wrote about creation. And he lived 700 years before Dorothy Day. And so he can get away with being non-offensive. Dorothy Day is too close to our own times and to our own reactions to things we don't fully understand to have that same kind of general acceptance. And so a direct result of that is, although people have been trying very hard to have Dorothy Day recognized as a saint, it's probably never going to happen. Because
never say never.
So I decided that I would talk about Dorothy Day and draw some comparisons to St. Francis.
I love that.
And one is that St. Francis was the child of very wealthy parents and probably would have had life as a wealthy merchant, but turned his back on that because of a very significant experience that he had of God calling him. Dorothy Day was the child of middle class to upper middle class to sometimes barely holding on to lower class parents. Her father was a journalist. And specifically a sports journalist, and liked to write about the racetracks. And also liked to gamble.
Explains some things.
It explains how their
fortunes rose and fell.
That's right.
Wow.
And Dorothy was drawn to the world of journalism. And she won a scholarship to attend the University of Illinois. Stayed there for 2 years, got bored, went to New York City to seek her fortune and to find work writing, and wrote for several publications that had very left-leaning.
Okay.
And she was also raised in a home that was nominally Christian.
Okay.
She had some exposure as a child to friends who were Catholic, to friends who were Jewish. When she went to New York City, she roomed with 3 young women who were Catholic and started attending worship with them, and found herself more and more drawn to the Catholic practices. And when she was 30, she was baptized.
Wow.
So she's living in New York City. She's writing for newspapers and other publications that are very concerned about social issues and workers' rights and women's rights. In 1932, she traveled to Washington, D.C. for a march on hunger. And there were 3,000 people who were marching, and they were hungry people. And she participated in that march, in that protest. And the thing that was forward in her thought during that whole experience was, where is the church?
Oh.
So following the march, she went to the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception and describes a heartfelt experience of begging God to show her what it is she's being called to do, because she has this sense of she's not fulfilling what her call is. And to back up again, at one point she had left journalism, enrolled in a nursing program, and became completely convinced that she was to be a journalist, not a nurse. and so she's begging God, what is it you want me to do? Please show me. Came back to New York City, and the story goes that sitting on her doorstep was Peter Morin, who had come from France. He had grown up in a peasant's household, the oldest of 22 children.
God love his mother.
Actually, his mother died after the 3rd or 4th child. His father remarried.
A lot more.
But at some point, he had been a teacher in France. At some point, he had been part of a religious community.
Okay.
And then he had immigrated to Canada, had done some farming, and there are big gaps.
What a character.
But showed up in New York City at some of these publications that Dorothy had worked for, looking for someone to partner with him to be the voice to get his ideas out there. And they pointed him to Dorothy Day. But she shows up, she's coming home from this experience in Washington, D.C., and he's sitting on her doorstep. And it took a while for him to convince her, but then they became this rock-solid duo who, first of all, published the paper, and then it was at his urging and with many of his ideas about houses of hospitality that came about, and also his interest in agriculture that led to the communes, the farming communes.
Who today in the Catholic Church, like under what jurisdiction does the worker movement and its houses of hospitality come? Did they ever become associated with a religious order?
No, people compare them to the Franciscans, but they are not a religious order, and I don't believe they have official standing within the Catholic Church.
Okay.
I love that
didn't
sense of her, like that feeling of she is out there experiencing something, right? Seeing the needs of the world and saying, where is the church?
Yeah.
I think is that when you said that, I just thought like, wow, for her to be attuned to that something bigger was speaking through her. Because I think otherwise we get caught up in the movement and we're doing something and we're doing this, but that idea that she was called in that moment.
So she lived in both worlds, the world of the Catholic Church and the world of those who are protesting and calling into question what's going
justice.
on in our society.
Secular activists.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, when I listed, she had a broad range of things that she spoke out about.
Yeah.
The first edition of the Catholic Worker had 2 stories above the fold line.
Okay.
I've just bumped my, am I okay? One of them was about child labor. And she told the story of children who were working in New York under terrible conditions. And the other story was about Black workers who were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 10 cents a day in the 1930s.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can see the broad range of movements that caught her interest and her attention. She was an activist, and part of the work of Catholic Worker Movement is to be speaking out and acting out, often in acts of civil disobedience. And the first time that she was arrested, she was part of a protest about women's voting rights.
Okay.
The last time she was arrested, at age 75, she was sitting on a picket line in California protesting rights for United Farm Workers as part of Cesar Chavez's work that he did.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When did she die? At what age?
1980. So she was 83.
Do you know where she's buried?
I do not.
Marie could look that up. Talk amongst yourselves.
Well, there is some like interesting listening to the 3 luminary figures that we have, but especially between Sojourner Truth and Dorothy Day, of almost a passing of a baton, right? And that continuation of the work with the same sense of social justice and activism and being in the places and in the the spaces that you need to speak truth. I think speaks through what she did and experienced as well.
Yes, and one of the things I so admire about her is her courageous way of going about this. When she said that we should not get involved in World War II, readership of the Catholic Worker plummeted.
Oh, I'm sure.
But she needed to make that statement. And again, she was not popular for her views on the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. She courted a lot of enemies for her outspoken, what she said about the nuclear arms race. There were...
She saw a lot. If you think about the time period that that turn of the century up into like in the 80s, I just think of all that America was going through, and for her to be speaking up at those points was pretty incredible.
But the thing that kept her going, her North Star through all of that and through all of the controversy, was she always pointed to the Sermon on the Mount.
Wow. Okay.
And to Matthew 25.
Yeah.
As you do it for the least of these, my brothers.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So one of the questions we had said would be good to talk about, and I'm curious to hear how you would say this. You've spoken about her life and what you admire. How has her example, in what ways would you say, shaped you in your living?
I think that her concern for the poorest among us and her insistence that our call is for each of us personally, not our church bodies, but each of us personally, to be concerned and to be involved in alleviating the pain and hunger and suffering of the least among us has been for me an inspiration. And my work as a parish pastor was frequently in congregations that were in distressed neighborhoods. My work with immigrants and refugees has been with people who have no say themselves and are looking to those who have power and have voice to speak out for them. So that's how it's influenced.
Well, thank you. I don't know what you were nervous about.
I know,
you were
fantastic.
eloquent, and I learned quite a lot. And I've heard you speak before about Dorothy Day, and I've read a bit about Dorothy Day, but I've learned a lot, as I did about Sojourner Truth. And we hope, the three of us, that those of you who have listened to or watched these 3 episodes may have heard something that grabbed your interest, or even more important, inspired you in some way in your own faithful living. It's been a pleasure for the 3 of us to do this. Thank you. Thank you for finally wearing down your resistance to doing this. I'm Paul Baglios.
I'm Sharon Baglios.
And I'm Megan Wyant. Thank you for joining us.
This has been 2 Pews in a Pod, a podcast hosted by the pastor of Evangelical Lutheran Church in Frederick, Maryland. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.